Okay, thank you.
And let me put this over on my other screen. Okay, so the test is going to be on, can everyone see that screen right now? With some essay questions on it.
Yes.
Okay, topics. All right, good. So the test is next Friday, and we're going to do this today. Originally, I was going to do it Thursday, but I think I'm going to do the next review section on Monday and then on Wednesday. So I'm going to move everything back to have it a little more immediate. Of course, I don't know. Test start for next. I don't know. We'll see. But I made this review sheet, and I'll make you a copy of it. I made a couple changes with it, but what I did is I went through the main factors, main issues of the eras between the French and Indian War and World War II. So things like Antebellum Reform, Manifest Destiny. By the way, let me make sure this is recording. I am recording. By the way, is everyone okay with me recording? I'm supposed to ask. Okay, back to this. So I have all the reform, and then I put one or two potential essay questions. So what I went through a list and went through a bunch of the old AP exams and took some of the questions just to give you an idea of what kind of questions they'll ask, and they're going to be really good ones in to think about what kind of thesis statement you would write. And this would be a good thing for me on Thursday or Monday, whatever day we do the, I let somebody in. This would be a good thing for me to talk about thesis statements down the road. But I'm going to give this out, and what I'd like everyone to do with this is go through these topics with your review packet. And so for example, factors leading to the rebellion against England. So that's a basic topic for the AP exam. Look at your, let me get this up here. So look at your review packet and go through some of the terms on the review packet that directly relate to this. And so kind of already start organizing facts, people, events, and places from your review packet and put it in these topics, or at least think about it. So when you get the question for the AP exam, you want to have like, oh no, I don't even know where to look. You already have that. And there's some practice thesis statement or essay questions for you to think about thesis statements. And so that's what I did with this. And so let me move this just back. You get a blue screen for a second. Hope you enjoy it. And so then when you have this review packet, and if it's talking about the events leading up to the revolution, you already have all these issues right here: British Debt, Stamp Act, Townshend Act, Stamp Act, Second Continental Congress. They're all right there, so you're already thinking about it. And so those would be good things for paragraphs, or at least information you can use to reinforce your documents, all right there, and you've already thought about it. So that was what I did with this, and I will make a copy or I'll have a link for everybody when I'm done with this. And so that's what I want to do real quick for this. All right. And this is not an assignment. It's just a review thing for you to do. Now, the review packet's a big assignment. And so what I was going to do now is go over the first couple pages, basically periods 3 and 4 of the review packet. And I will answer any question anybody has. And so you can do it 2 different ways. Let me clear my screen up here. You can type one in on the meeting chat, or if you want to, just say it. Open up your microphone and say it. Hopefully we won't have a bunch of people talking over each other, but I can figure it out. And the big thing about this one is, when I go through these, even if you have something down, this reinforces it, but also it gives you the opportunity to maybe get something down that you might have missed. Because it's really easy to write down a few things, but not get the relationships that I try to give. So first off, are there any questions from the review list from the first 3 pages? I have my screen up here, so any of them, or I can just start going through some, but I would like to have any questions. So either type or say. Oh, common sense. Let's do common sense right there. That's on the first page, about 2/3 of the way down. Common Sense was one of the great pamphlets written by, move this over here, written by Thomas Paine. So Thomas Paine was an Englishman who was a small r Republican. He believed in a Republican form of government. And in it, he laid out one of the most persuasive reasons why the colonies should rebel from Great Britain. And what they laid down was this, that there is nothing that's real that gives the king power. The king is only king by luck of birth. So there's no divine right. There's no reason why the king should be in charge. People should be in charge, and they should decide their own fate. And so he laid it out really well in Common Sense. So why should we follow somebody who gets their power by luck of birth? And this laid out a persuasive argument for independence. And it came out right before the Declaration of Independence. And even though the Declaration of Independence is going to have great impact, the philosophy will mean a lot, Common Sense actually had more impact at that time because it was easy to read. People could really understand that idea that the king should not be in charge. We should be in charge of our own fate. Oh, the word you should get down is self-determination. This is our self-determination. We decide. And self-determination more and more will come to what America means by democracy. That fits in with Jacksonian, the Jacksonian era, that self-determination. So when Wilson in 1917 said the U.S. is fighting for democracy, what he means was self-determination. All right, let's get to Republican womanhood. That's a few things down. And Republican womanhood, and we'll do that one first, and then we'll get to your question. So Republican womanhood, just one second. Sorry, I'm having a little issue here. Good, we got a lot of people. All right, so Republican womanhood. The big thing about that one was the idea being that in the new government, kind of think about Constitution, but it started before the Constitution was actually written. Women cannot vote, but what is their role in a Republican society? Their role would be to teach their children to be good citizens in a republic, to be good citizens. So they'll teach their sons to be voting or conscientious voters in this new republic. They can help choose their leaders and be good citizens. And they will teach their daughters how to teach their children how to be good citizens in a republic. So that will be the role of women. And that fits two ways. First off, this really came out from this idea about, or this idea that would be stated by Abigail Adams, which she wrote her husband, saying, don't forget, she actually said, don't forget the ladies when you write the Declaration of Independence and then think about the future government. And so Adams, who was, I believe, only mentioned the side, said, okay, well, women, we won't forget them. They will have this role. And the second big thing about that was that this ties directly to the cult of domesticity. Everyone got that? The cult of domesticity. This is exactly, remember the cult of domesticity, the women have a role to teach their children to be moral, good citizens. Republican womanhood ties to that. Let's get to the next one. Well, let's do a British debt first, and I'll come back to Antebellum Reforms because it's on this page. So let me scroll up. British debt. So the big thing about British debt was Britain had been basically at war, all these wars for empire from 1689 all the way to 1763, and they were at a civil war before that. So Britain had borrowed a lot of money through bonds. And after the French were defeated in the war, in the French and Indian War, Britain now has decided it's time to pay back their bonds, to pay back their debt. And so this is the British debt led them to enforce. They made the decision that we are going to enforce mercantilism. So we are going to start taxing the colonies and make them pay. The colonies are supposed to provide money for the mother country, and now they will pay. So the British debt issue, we're going to pay back all our debt. In fact, their debt was like 2.5 times the size of their economy, which was just massive because they had to pay back in gold. And the British debt then would directly lead to the Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, Tea Act, and the American Revolution. So let's go ahead and do Antebellum Reforms. Let me find it here. Is that on page 3? Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that one, Antebellum Reforms. And okay, now how did this happen? I'm just looking at all my screen all of a sudden changed. Sorry about that. So, Antebellum Reforms. And these are reforms, and they're called reforms. It all depends on your point of view. But these led directly out of the Industrial Revolution. So that's a big thing. You have to tie that to the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution, sometimes we refer to it as the market revolution, this capitalist system being created. But the Antebellum Reforms, the big thing about these were all adjustments to the Industrial Revolution. And so ideas like the Transcendentalist, and the Transcendentalists were a reform with this idea that will transcend the imperial world of capitalism and trying to get wealth and go back to nature and get away from this science and this new system of capitalism. And this was Ralph Waldo Emerson, and really was the idea of the elite. Another one was prohibition. The first were prohibition or temperance movements. And this was to limit people drinking. And the big thing about that one was, first off, people drank significantly more. And now in this new capitalist world, if people are using their paychecks to drink, that means less money for the family. But also, employers wanted sober workers. And this was a way to control workers, to get them to drink less. Another reform was, Antebellum Reform was the Second Great Awakening, this huge revival in religion. And they would have this very evangelical movement in religion. And this is where you get things such as the rapture, which came about in this era, and a really emotional connection instead of a very literal connection to religion. And there would be tent revivals, big, huge celebrations of people being another term that would come about in this era would be born again to Christianity. But this was a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. All these radical changes going on about way people make a living and society, and it was a way to try to adapt to those changes. And this would fit in with the Protestant work ethic. Temperance, hard work, and punctuality. Another one was the beginnings of jail reform. The idea was that they would, this a lot of it was done by Dorothea Dix. And the big thing about that one was, if we're going to actually imprison people, they should be places that would actually try to reform people, and like prison sentences, those things will come about in that era. And lastly, suffrage, the women's rights movement, and Seneca Falls of 1848. And that one I have separate, but all these antebellum reforms are a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. Next one, where are we at here, Jarek? Okay, Constitutional Conventions. Let's go back up. Okay, so it's the top of page 2. Top of page 2, the Constitutional Convention. And this was a direct result of the one above, Shays' Rebellion and the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So put an arrow, I don't know how you want to do it, but make sure there's a connection there. This led to this. And the convention decided that they wanted to throw out the old government. And so they met in secret. And at this Constitutional Convention, it very quickly decided, okay, this won't talk about the compromises, right? You don't have the compromises, good. So the big thing about this one was that they decided that they were going to do, or make this a republic and a government that will try to have as many ways to separate the people from the actual government. This was meant to be a republic and not a democracy. They thought there was too much democracy in the Articles of Confederation. And that's why they came up with the concept of separation of powers. Separation of powers comes from the French philosopher Montesquieu. And the idea that there will be separate branches of government that will have certain roles and they'll later call it, to check and balance the powers of their form of governments. And the three big ones will be the one with the most power. Just a sec. Somebody's getting stuff outside my window. That's one thing about this. I got windows and I got distracted. So the first one was the executive, and the executive branch would have the most power. They carry out and interpret the laws. They enforce the laws and do foreign policy. The second branch, even though it's Article 1 of the Constitution, would be the legislative branch, and they write the laws, and they have most of what's called the enumerated powers. The enumerated powers, the powers listed out. They could do things like print money, borrow money. But there's also the necessary and proper clause that says that they can do whatever is necessary to carry out their existing powers, and that necessary and proper will be the elastic clause. And the third one will be the judicial branch, and the judicial branch, it's not really clear, but eventually they would get the power of constitutional review, to review the constitutionality of laws. And so that's the big thing about the Constitutional Convention. But here's the thing. Only one part of the government is elected by the people, and that's the House of Representatives. Everything else is going to be separate from the people to make sure that the turbulent masses of the people are controlled. Only the House. The Senate is chosen by state assemblies. The president is chosen by the Electoral College, and the judicial branch are appointed by the president. Okay. Next one. Is that good? All right. Next one. Nullification of the tariff. Where's that one at? Is that page 3 too? Yep. So page 3. Nullification of the tariff of 1832. And where were we at? Okay. So the nullification battle of 1832, the whole issue here, make sure you get this down. It is all about protecting slavery. The whole thing was about protecting slavery. And what the issue was that nullification was John C. Calhoun convinced South Carolina to nullify the tariff of 1832. Nullify means that state will not obey. The state will not obey, claiming that the tariff is unconstitutional. And so they would nullify the tariff of 1832. Why did they nullify it? Well, first off, high tariffs protect industry, and industry was forming in the north, so this would not help the South. Tariffs raise prices, especially on farmers. So the tariff might hurt them. But the big thing was, the big reason Calhoun wanted to nullify this tariff is he wanted to unify the South, find an issue that would unify them together, regardless of the two new parties, unify them to protect slavery. And that's the big thing. If you just simply write that they nullify and not obey it, you've missed the entire point of nullification. It is to unify the South to protect slavery. Yeah, they don't like the tariff, but he's looking for that issue. So when they nullified it, they thought other southern states would follow. But President Jackson reacted fiercely against this. And he said that not only were they traitors and he would personally lead the army to put it down, Congress passed the Force Bill, giving the president the authority to enforce federal laws. And at the same time, he worked on a compromise tariff. This scared the rest of the South, and South Carolina was alone. And so eventually, they would have to accept defeat on nullification and agree to a compromise tariff that came up by Henry Clay. And so nullification failed in Calhoun's goal to unify the South to protect slavery. Jackson, without a doubt, protected the Union, saved the Union, because it would have collapsed then. But with nullification gone, the only chance the South has to their point of view, protect slavery would be secession. So you lead that up to 1860. Ooh, let's go back. And by the way, good correction on tariff. But it seems like Tariff should have a U. All right, let's go. Where are we at here? Is that first page? All right. So we have Pontiac's War of 1763 and Proclamation of 1763. Two big events that led to the American Revolution. Huge events. And, okay, so let's get to it. After the French and Indian War and the French were defeated, the various tribes that were in American Indian tribes, or tribes that were between the French and the British possessions, along the Great Lakes region and along the St. Lawrence River, they realized that now there's nothing to stop English expansion. And so they unified in Michigan, around the Great Lakes region. They created a confederacy of Ottawas. We call it Pontiac War after a leading Ottawa, a leading member of the Ottawa tribe. But they formed a confederacy and they attacked every fort or settlement that the British were creating or occupying in the Great Lakes region and took most of them. And this so shocked the British because they were done with wars, especially since they just defeated the French and now another war, that the king would make the Proclamation of 1763 that limited colonial settlement, said no colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. So limited to only the east. So put that line along, divided the Appalachian Mountains, basically saying to the tribes, this land is yours, we're not going to take it. Now I have to be very clear about it. England was planning on taking it down the road. They didn't want any war. But to the colonists who thought we fought and sacrificed for the war, why did we fight and sacrifice? Because we wanted that land. And now you're not going to let us have it. This infuriated them and they just ignored it. The most famously would be Daniel Boone, who just went to Kentucky and violated the law. All right, let's get to the next one. Where are we at here? By the way, this is the good thing about this. I can go through a lot and it's good review. Okay, bus and the elastic clause. So that's, let me find it here. Maybe. So it's the middle of the second page? Yeah. So it's right in between. And by the way, hopefully you noticed the way I did this. So I have Washington's farewell address, but then I have the Assumption Bill, the bus, and the tariff. Those were the three big issues that led to the growth of political parties. All three of those. That would be the divide between those who followed Hamilton and those who followed Jefferson. So those directly led to this. Don't forget, these issues, the topics I put in here, all these people, events, places, these things, they're not in a vacuum. They're not all individual trivial tidbits of factoids. What a weird thing to say. They all relate. And make sure you think about that relation. And that's why I have those topics down. So you're thinking about how they relate. Okay, so back to this, the bus. The bus is the Bank of the United States. And Hamilton wanted a Bank of the United States because Hamilton wanted to control the money supply. He wanted a stable economic system. But the Constitution never says to create a bank. And so what Hamilton uses is that necessary and proper clause, aka the elastic clause, that says since the government has the authority to print and coin money and borrow money, that it is necessary and proper for them to make a Bank of the United States. So he's using that elastic clause or the necessary and proper clause. Clause just means law. And the whole idea of this bank would be the bank would collect tax revenues, loan money to create other banks. So it would create a banking system. So it would loan money to create banks and print currency. So collect tax revenues, loan money to create new banks, but here's the biggie, print currency. Therefore, they could control the money supply and have a stable money supply backed by tax revenues, which is the way currency works today. Currency is worth something because the government can collect taxes. Jefferson and Madison looked at this as this bank will only help the elite and only help the merchant class. This bank is designed to help merchants accumulate wealth. And don't forget, all farmers are in debt. Madison and Jefferson are plantation owners. And so they were opposed to it for that reason. But they made the argument it's not in the Constitution. It's not one of the enumerated powers listed out, so therefore it's unconstitutional. So that was their fight. And there you see the two political parties developing. Washington would throw his influence towards the Bank of the United States. Hamilton convinced them, and so that's the bus. Good? All right, let's get to another one. Want to do the Panic of 1837? I want to too. So where are we at here? Okay, so bottom of page, is that page 3? Mine says page 1. Okay, page 3. So the Panic of 1837. And this, okay, there was a panic in 1819, but this is the first real financial panic and economic depression of the new system of capitalism. It is literally just starting. So this is a biggie, the first one. And it was caused by speculation in land. Speculation in land. And the new technology of railroads. So speculation. And what happened was prices went up, people borrowed money to speculate. We've talked a lot about speculation, so I think you understand that. So speculation in land and railroads. And land prices went up much more than the value of land, and then the bubble burst in 1837. But there are two other big things that went along with this. First off, during Jackson's war against the National Bank, the Bank of the United States, when he started taking government revenues out, Nicholas Biddle, who owned the bank, and that goes up, the Panic of 1837 directly connects to the bank war. Biddle began pulling currency out, trying to create deflation to destroy the economy, to show people the importance of the bank. And so this began to lead to an economic crash already. And then Jackson issued the Specie Circular to try to stop the speculation that said government land could only be purchased with coin, with gold coin, to try to stop the speculation with paper currency, which wasn't as valuable. These two things led to the would help trigger, well, these two, Biddle's War led to the Depression, the Specie Circular helped pop the bubble, and that led to a horrible economic panic. Mass unemployment, the first time anybody ever seen it, helped trigger expansion westward. Okay, let's get to the Land Ordinance of 1685. So we're going to go way back in time before we're supposed to. You know, I'm going to change my mind on this. I'm going to do the Land Ordinance of 1785. And that's in the middle of page 2, right at the end of period 3. And the Land Ordinance of 1785, what this did is it set up the system to survey, the word was gone, I'm sorry, to survey public land. And so they set up the system to divide the land up into townships and sections, to divide up the land so they can make it available to sell government land to potential farmers or other people. And so they divided up into sections or townships and sections. Townships were 6 by 6 mile square. Sections were one mile by 1 mile square. And the money from one of every 30 or one of every township section, so one of every 36 sections in a township, the value of that will go to public education. So that's a land ordinance. So that set up how the federal government would deal with all this land. So basically, the federal government will survey that and not allow people to squat or take the land, which was already happening. And that's why if you look at a map of most places in the United States that came in as federal territories, they are divided up in this grid pattern. Next, Saratoga. I'm trying to find Saratoga. Okay, Saratoga, is that page 2 or is that page 1? Yeah, page 1. Saratoga, about 3/4 of the way down the page. And Saratoga, the Continental Army defeated a British army that was trying to invade New York. From Canada, they were advancing north along the Hudson River. The U.S. Army, under a general by the name of Horatio Gates, the Continental Army, defeated a British army in October in 1777. So October 1777, 3 battles that we lumped together as Saratoga. And this huge victory did not end the war, but it convinced Britain's enemies that Britain might lose. And Saratoga directly led to the Franco-American alliance and France entering the American Revolution. And with French help, weapons and money and troops, half of Washington's army by 1781 were French. That allowed the United States to become independent. The Netherlands also entered it, and so did Spain. All had long grudges against the English, and it turned this rebellion that Britain was fighting against to another one of these worldwide wars for empire. Next one, let's look at Jefferson's philosophy. And so that looks like it's at the about 2/3 of the way down page 2. Does that sound right? So right at the beginning of period 4 in Jefferson's philosophy. Oh, I know, I'm not giving you much room. Remember what I told you. I just want you to use bullet points, write down a few words that mean something to you, that you have to think about and try to consolidate all your thoughts into just a few words. Because when you go back and look at it, there'll be something in your mind that would trigger a memory. At least that's the idea. We'll see. So Jefferson's philosophy, and this should connect back up to all these assumption bill, bust, all the issues here, all of the election and everything else. They are all interrelated. I'm making sure this is still recording. Good. So Jefferson's philosophy was basically this. First off, Jefferson was obsessed with the West. He wanted Western expansion. And that's why he would do things like the core discovery of Louisiana Purchase and going west, because he's a plantation owner. Plantation owners are obsessed by land. Next, Jefferson believed in an agrarian society. His goal was to have, the mailman came. His goal was to have a country made up of small yeoman farmers. Remember, those are independent farmers. He thought that was the safest way for a republic. An independent farmer is beholden to nobody else, and therefore they can make sound decisions in a republic. That's why he feared people like Hamilton and their desire for what's going to become capitalism. That's why he feared the wage system, because somebody working for a wage is not really free. They are essentially slaves or beholden to those who employ them. That was his point of view. Next, he was frugal. He was worried about the government spending too much, not just because he was worried about debt, but also he was fearful of people like Hamilton borrowing money with the government and using that to do things like the Bank of the United States. Next, he was also, maybe one of the most important things about Jefferson, he was pragmatic. Jefferson was intensely pragmatic. And when I mean pragmatic, what I'm talking about there is, he believed that a practical solution was best. He was not going to be tied to his ideology. And the best example of this was that Jefferson, back when John Adams was president, talked about we need to only do, or we must have a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Use only enumerated powers. That's why we can't have, for example, the Bank of the United States. Only strict interpretation of the Constitution. Only enumerated powers. Yet, when he became president and he had the power, now he wanted the elastic clause. He wanted more power. He wanted the necessary and proper clause. So, for example, he said enumerated powers, and yet nowhere in the Constitution does it say how the federal government can purchase land, and yet he did the Louisiana Purchase. He attacked Adams for the quasi-war against France, and yet he sent the Navy to fight the Barbary pirates in the Barbary Wars. And another example of Jefferson's pragmatism was he knew slavery was horrible. He knew it was immoral and would destroy the republic, and yet he did everything he could to defend it and spread it. Why? Because he made a pragmatic decision. I have a good life. I like my wine. I like the lifestyle I have, and that comes from slaves, from working people to death. That's a horrible version of pragmatism, but that's true. All right, good. Any questions on that? You can ask me later. Next one, let's get to Yorktown. Let's go up here. Yorktown, so near about 3/4 of the way of the bottom of the first page, Yorktown. Yorktown is the last major battle of the Revolutionary War, where Washington, and remember, half of his army were French, so Continental and French forces surrounded the British under Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown in Virginia. They surrounded him, but the big thing was that the French Navy was able to isolate, to blockade the British at Yorktown, so the British could not evacuate him, because the British were unwilling to risk hurricanes and send their fleet up in the Caribbean. And so the British were surrounded at Yorktown and they surrendered. With that, the British realized we cannot subdue the rebellion, and that would begin the road to the Treaty of Paris of 1783 and the independence of the United States. And so that's why Yorktown is such an important battle. So Saratoga, I only put 2 battles on here. Saratoga got the French in, Yorktown the last battle. Growth of parties, Democrats and Whigs. Is that the bottom? Is that 3rd page? Yeah, 3rd page. And so the growth of parties, this is the second party structure that come about. In the 1790s, we had the Republicans and you'll see them in the book as Democratic Republicans, but they call themselves Republicans. Republicans and Federalists. So this is the second one, after the era of good feelings, the Democrats and the Whigs. And the growth of this party came about more than any other simple reason was because of democracy. Democracy. Letting more people have control over the vote, suffrage, self-determination. So giving regular people the vote. Remember, the Constitution was specifically written to have as many layers as possible from the people and the government. Oh, did I miss one? Oh, I'm sorry. I will come back to that one, okay? So thank you for reminding me. I'll come back to that. And we'll do a few more. I don't know how long I'll do this, but I hope this is helping. Even if you've gone over it, it should be great review. Where are we at here? Growth of parties. So the growth of party. And the big thing about the Democrats were that they were the party of the common man. Remember, common man does not mean average. Common means of common birth. They're not elite because they had rich parents who were born to an aristocracy. So this is the party of the common man. And they believed in democracy, or the people have the right to self-determination. And so what they wanted was, they didn't fear government aid, but they didn't want government that would help big business, help the wealthy. They wanted the government to be in a position to help working people. And so that's why, to their point of view, we want to do everything possible to put more power into the hands of people. So that is why the Democrats would be against the national bank, because they saw the national bank was creating a system that would funnel power and wealth to the very elite. That is why they're also for Indian removal. To their point of view of the Democrats, Indian removal would open up land for small farmers to become independent, taking that Jeffersonian ideal. And so what they wanted was more power for people. And and then the Whigs would be anti-democrat. They were opposed to the democracy. They wanted government by the elite. And so they feared the democracy. They wanted power to the elite. And that is why they would be for things like a national bank. They wanted a tariff because tariff raised prices for capitalists. And, oh, I almost forgot one thing. So the Democrats were made up of working people, immigrants, and small farmers. Working people, immigrants, and farmers. The Whigs were made up of capitalists, and the big plantation owners, and those who thought the system was working for them. And this is why I was jumping the gun. You'll notice I have growth of parties, Democrats, and Whigs. If you look down the bottom of the page, it has the divide over capitalism, free labor, and wage slavery. The Whigs were the party of free labor. The Democrats were the party that thought capitalism was creating wage slaves. That's the last thing I wanted to get. That's why I was trying to look at that. I thought I put it right underneath it, but put an arrow or something. They are intimately connected. The Whigs thought, we have free labor. We can do anything we want in this great dynamic system. And the Democrats thought capitalism was creating wage slavery, so being dependent upon dependent upon a wage, dependent upon somebody else for our livelihood, and therefore we're wage slaves. All right, what's the next one? Northwest Ordinance. So let's go to, okay, so that should be in the middle of page 2. Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Northwest Ordinance did two things. First off, it set the path that states would be created. So it set the system that it would go from federal territory, go from government land. The first step would be territories, and then it would become a state. And the territories would be administered by the federal government, and then states will be independent with the power the states have under the Constitution. And they will be equal under the Constitution. New states will be equal to old states. At least eventually that's what's going to come out of this. So it set up that system, territories to states. And then the next thing was the Northwest Ordinance had to deal with the issue of slave codes. Well, the federal government imposed slave codes in territories, in these new territories. So before their states, the territories, because this is important. If they allow for slave codes, that means people will bring their slaves knowing that they will be protected with a militia, and remember all of those slave codes like the fornication laws. Well, the Northwest Ordinance, what they did is they established that there'll be 5 states north of the Ohio River. 5 states north of the Ohio River, and these will not have slave codes. You'll see this written as, and then they'll be free, but the big thing is they won't have slave codes, so it'll be difficult to have slaves. But this set up a sectional divide because that implies that in any states, and trying to be 4 states below the Ohio River, that will allow them to have slave codes. So that set up the sectional divide. And it's really ironic because Jefferson, showing his pragmatism, would make a proposal to the Articles of Confederation Congress that all the states created in that area between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi would not have slave codes. And that did not pass because it only got 8 votes. And the Articles of Confederation, it needed 9 votes to pass a law. All right, so let's get to the Second Continental Congress. And that's in the first page. Yeah, maybe just under halfway down, just below the T Act, Second Continental Congress. And so this would be the ad hoc government of the new United States. The Second Continental Congress would meet right after the battles of Lexington and Concord. And it would be this body that would create, or that would declare independence and also create the first form of government, the Articles of Confederation. And this was made up of patriots from all 13 states, all 13 colonies and then states. And what they did is, first off, they create the Continental Army, and they try to create a continental currency, Continentals they call them. But since no one trusted they could have taxes to pay it back, they were pretty much worthless. They put George Washington as commander of the forces, even though when they first met, all the fighting was around Boston, but they wanted Washington because he would unify the most important of the colonies, because it was the richest at the time, Virginia, with the fight that's going on in New England. And they're the ones who issued the Olive Branch petition to the king saying, we can still go back. We don't need revolution. But to that Olive Branch petition, the king would respond with a proclamation saying, you're all traitors and you'll be treated as traitors under English law, which meant execution, trying to intimidate them. It would be that pushing by the king and the British evacuating Boston that the Second Continental Congress will declare independence. Washington's farewell address. So that's at, I think where are we at here? There it is, about near the top of page 2. Washington's farewell address. And what this was, Washington actually kind of shocked them how rancorous the political situation had become during his first 2 terms. The fighting between now the 2 new political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans. You have Republicans literally calling George Washington a monarchist and pro-English. That should give you an idea how violent they became. Don't forget, when people said, oh, politics are so corrosive today and it's never been so divided, they don't know their history. Calling George Washington a traitor, that's pretty divided. So in Washington's farewell address, setting the precedent for farewell addresses, most of them don't really have a great impact, but this one, Washington laid out his 2 biggest fears. First up, he was fearful of rancorous political division. So he warned about political parties. He still had this dream that all people could come together. Washington had this ideal that the elites could come together and work together to create a sound government. He was an elitist. He did not believe that regular people should have a voice. And he also totally didn't totally ignore the fact that even in the elite, they have different points of view. You have merchants who are elite and plantation owners who are elite, and they have different points of view on which way the country should go. So, but he warned about political parties. So he's relatively anti-democratic. And the other thing was avoid foreign entanglements. Avoid foreign entanglements. Don't get involved in wars or alliances. The wars between the British and the French were going on again around the French Revolution. And this leads to not only huge political divides, but countries going to war, countries creating large militaries, countries creating shadow governments and spies and intelligence, which is exactly what would happen after World War II. The Treaty of Grenville. Oh, it's right there. It's right in front of me. So it's just before the end of, or just before the beginning of period 4, so near the middle of page 2. And the Treaty of Grenville would, one of the most important treaties in American history. This would be after the U.S. victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, defeating a coalition of tribes trying to hold Ohio and the old Northwest, so like Ohio, Indiana, Michigan. And also the creation of U.S. Army. It's actually a pretty fascinating story, but we just get to the treaty. What the treaty did is it said that the United States would get basically Ohio, most of what is Ohio today. And that would be now U.S. land. And the rest of the old Northwest, so that means a tiny little part of northwestern Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and what is going to be Wisconsin, all those areas will go to the various tribes forever. And that was the Treaty of Grenville. And the big thing about that one was the United States made this treaty. By making this treaty, establish the fact that these tribes are somewhat independent. They signed a treaty like a country would. But the big thing was the U.S. very quickly ignored this treaty. They almost immediately, squatters came in and took land, and they began to sign up a bunch of different unequal treaties and began chopping up the Treaty of Grenville. And this would set the precedent then. The U.S. would get a treaty and then break it, get a treaty, break it. over and over and over again. This would directly lead to, if we go down a little bit near the bottom of the page, to Tecumseh creating the last real effort to create a coalition that could stop the United States and lose at Tippecanoe. All right. Are there any more questions? Didn't I do the Republicans, Federalists and Republicans? Or I just mentioned it? I must have just mentioned it, huh? What time is it? So I do a couple more. So let's do that. The growth of parties, Federalist and Republican. And so the big thing about those parties, as I mentioned before, both of those parties, those three big issues above, those directly tie into the reasons or how these parties were created. So the Federalist Party evolved around the ideas, especially of Alexander Hamilton, but people like John Adams, he basically was a Federalist, John Jay, George Washington was sympathetic to the Federalists, even though technically he's no party. And okay, so, and by the way, I'm going to do Federalists, Republicans. We got the Bank War and McCulloch versus Maryland, and I'm going to stop there. Don't worry, I'll do this again. But, you know, an hour is pretty good. We went through a lot. So so ideas of Alexander Hamilton. And this was a party that was specifically a party of the elite. So they're a party of the elite. But their vision of the party was, as they saw, manufacturing and finance. So they wanted a strong financial system. That's why the bank and manufacturing. Pre-capitalism, but it's predicting industrialization. That's where you get the Bank of the United States. And what their vision was and that's also why they wanted the Assumption Bill. The Assumption Bill where the U.S. paid off all its old debt and therefore had good credit. And that's also why they wanted a tariff. A high protective tariff would keep out foreign competition and encourage U.S. manufacturing. Remember, that's a tax on imports. And so that was Hamilton's idea for the Federalist Party. And therefore, they believed in a very strong national government to organize this. And therefore, they believed in the elastic clause, or, another term for the elastic clause, implied powers. It's implied in the Constitution that they need to make a bank. So they have necessary, proper, implied, or elastic clause all mean the same thing. I know I mentioned that before, but I think I forgot to say it today. And they also supported England or Britain in the wars of revolution. They feared the French Revolution, saw it as too radical, but also looked at England as a model with the Bank of England and the Industrial Revolution. So those were the Federalists. The Republican Party, that was made up basically of the ideas around Jefferson and Madison. And, almost forgot, the Federalist Party was a party more of the Northeast. Northeast, so from Pennsylvania, but especially New York and New England. So the Republican Party. And so the Republican Party, they wanted, they believed this more of the idea of more and more of the common man. So more and more, remember that term, self-determination. And they feared, just one sec. They feared a strong central government because as they saw, it would help the merchant class. That's why they feared debt that would be created by the Assumption Bill, because it helped the merchant class, the banks. Tariffs would raise prices for merchants. They could charge higher prices because of tariff. And therefore, they were slightly more democratic, and they were more rural as opposed to being more urban, and they were more pro-France. They looked at the French Revolution, and especially Jefferson. Jefferson kind of saw it as his revolution, but a revolution for self-determination, for the liberal values that Jefferson believed in. And they claimed they were for a strict interpretation of the Constitution, but as I told you before, that would change when the Republicans were in power. And they also believed more in the power of states, partially because that weakens the federal government, which was controlled by the Federalists, but also they believed that more power in the states because it would be more difficult, they thought, to create an industrial society. So those are Republicans. Next one, bank war. So we'll do the bank war, and the bank war was, where's that at? Where's my mouse? So that's in the middle of page 3, and that was during the Jacksonian era of Jacksonian democracy. And to Jackson, the Bank of the United States represented concentrated power and concentrated wealth in the hands of the few. The bank was the first real corporation created in the United States. It was the head of it was Nicholas Biddle, and it put this much power into the hands of a few, and they could control the money supply. And by controlling the money supply, they could dictate the value of money, how much crops will cost. This will encourage debt. To Jackson, this represented concentrated power. And what he said was they could use that power to make or break average people and basically hold farmers and working people hostage to financial elites. And so Jackson was opposed to this bank. Henry Clay in 1832 tried to renew the Bank of the United States' charter that was going to come due in 1836. Clay wanted to make that an election issue. Jackson vetoed it. The first real usage of a veto as a political measure. And Jackson vetoed it. Jackson was reelected, saw this as a way to destroy the banks, and he began to take government revenues, tax revenues, that's supposed to go to the banks, and put them into state banks, soon to be called pet banks, pets of Jackson. And this infuriated Biddle, as I mentioned before, the Panic of 1837. And so he started to try to create deflation and cut back on money to destroy the economy to show how important the bank is. Because the bank, to Whigs, this represented not only financial stability, and but it also represented a way to help the elite and make sure that the merchant class and the new capitalists would be protected. And a lot of these pet banks, because there's no real regulations, and to be honest, Jackson did not see it that far. Jackson's idea is he definitely wanted to help farmers and working people, to his point of view, white farmers and white working people, but he never looked at the implications of that. They started making risky loans that helped fuel the speculation that led to the Panic of 1837. But the bank war, why it's important is it's a real issue of, here's the Democrats saying, we're going to support working people, and here are the Whigs saying, we are going to support the elite and new corporations. Okay, McCulloch versus Maryland. So McCulloch versus Maryland, that is one of the most important decisions of the Marshall Court. The Federalist Court, even after the Federalists were gone, John Marshall, appointed by Adams, would influence the U.S. government all the way through the 1830s until he died. And the big thing was the Marshall Court put more power into the hands of the federal government. And McCulloch versus Maryland is one of the most important ones. What it said is that the Bank of the United States, am I missing one here? The Bank of the United States, Maryland basically could not tax the Bank of the United States, the first Bank of the United States. And the Bank of the United States could be created by the federal government. And the big reason why that's important is, and this is what we got to get for, McCulloch versus Maryland said that implied powers of the Constitution are real, and the Supreme Court or the Congress can interpret it to do many different things. So it allowed for implied powers and therefore allowed for the Bank of the United States. And so that would set precedent for further action by Congress to take advantage of implied powers. All right, so just a sec, I accidentally got out of this. I got to get my screen back up. I went through a lot. Yeah, a little bit over an hour. So that's a pretty good. Are any questions about, then I'm gonna give you a link to that review list. It's just a really good list to go down and some sample sample essay questions. Some are really basic, some a little more complicated. And I know we have the DBQ that's due tonight at midnight, and I've gotten a lot of them graded already. So keep getting those in. And the big thing about the DBQ, don't forget, you need your outside information, OI. I'll put down OI on that. We need your outside information. And so if there's a document that talks about bombing of Japan, what kind of bombing? Remember, I specifically told you what type of bombing. That's the outside information. If it mentions the blockade, who is doing the blockade? And, mention things about, the war against Germany just ended. And, those are things that you need. All right. Are there any more questions? All right. I'm going to take this review. I'll put this online and also put it on YouTube. And so you'll be able to access the review. I hope this helped. I'm still tentatively planned for Wednesday, and Thursday for another review. I'm trying to decide if I want to do it closer to the exam or not. I originally had another one scheduled for Monday, but with meetings, I don't know what time I'll get on Monday. So I think I'm going to move that one to Wednesday. But I'm still tentatively planning on doing the next part on the next half of the review packet on Thursday. One more thing. I handed out a little bit over a page of just topics from 1896 to 1945. And the big thing about that is I don't need full things on that. Just a few words for each one. This should be really fresh in your mind. I'm hoping that, my fingers crossed. And so just something to trigger memory if we get a question on that. Who knows? I don't think they'll ask a question in that packet, but we got to be prepared. And the big thing is you'll have these review packets open. And so when you start the AP exam, oh, I almost forgot. Don't forget to look at this testing guide. Go through, it has the exam day checklist, the documents, all kinds of information on here. I tried to click some of these links, and they must be changing a few things, but you can come back to them. They have a YouTube site with a bunch of updates on them and information on how to get on this. Please look at this. And I've been looking for good programs that you can use to make PDFs. And a lot of people reminded me of something that I totally forgot. If you have, on an iPhone, if you have the notes part of it, if you make notes on the iPhone, you can take pictures and convert those into PDFs and make large files. I know some of you are already using that. And that's a really good feature if you have notes. As I understand it, it is similar on Android, but I don't have an Android, so I'm not 100% sure. But there'll be some other ones. I'll put links of them up tomorrow. This will help you not only turn in things for me, but I'm thinking for the AP exam. All right. No questions? Good review. Went through a lot. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a regular day of class because I want to kind of get back in that. All right, if there's no more questions, I'm stopping the recording, and I will see you tomorrow.